Hello, fantastic to be here. Thank you very much. I hope you've all had a good day. It sounds like it's been brilliant. So I'm going to share, go straight in. So I've been asked to talk about healthy neighbourhoods, and before I give you my sort of summary, I want you to stop and pause for a moment and just think about what for you are the key ingredients of a healthy neighbourhood. And it'd be great if you could just pop in chat just a few of the key ingredients that what do you think about when I say healthy neighbourhoods? So pop those in chat. So we've got all sorts of great things popping up: green space, community cohesion, neighbours, removal of barriers to inclusion, safe, communication, outdoors, cycle paths, open spaces. So keep looking. But lots of the features that you can see on this image here inevitably pop up. So lots of those things about outdoors, green, points of connection, points for people to sit and to linger and to connect and to talk, to actively get about, to walk your dog. There's a sense of space and connection to each other and to nature. So in the end, healthy neighbourhoods matter to all of us, and we all have our sense of what that means to us, and often a lot of very similar ingredients that you can see there that are coming up from people in this group. But we also come from it with our own lens in terms of our own life experience and things that really matter to us individually. So in terms of me, this is kind of me growing up in Manchester on the adventure playgrounds of Manchester, and here Turkey Lane in North Manchester, and then getting on in what you might know now as kind of the Manctopia of Manchester. So in an urban environment, of course, lots of you will be sitting at different places with a very different view outside your window. And as a Manchester councillor who grew up in this place, I guess what I've been keen to see is how we design back in and all those things that make for a good space to play, to linger, to be, that really create a kind of live well neighbourhood. So this is where I was yesterday on my lunchtime for a lunchtime walk with a colleague, which is Mayfield Park, which is our new public park in the middle of Manchester. And as you can see, designed in green, it's got lots of biodiversity, and there's these wonderful slides that, hey, designing joy in now, if at any other point, is absolutely critical. And I do recommend, if you're coming to Manchester, come and have a play because it's brilliant. So that's one of the lenses in which I guess I come to this conversation in terms of my own experience, that is very much within the built environment of Manchester. And then within that, as someone who lives and is a councillor in Chorlton, and who's been keen within that as a local neighbourhood to think how we collectively reimagine that as a space. So this is an event we held a couple of weeks ago where we closed what is one of the main high streets through the middle of Chorlton, and brought people together as a community, as traders, as local businesses, and partners and community groups, and created along the whole stretch of this, you can't see the whole length of it, tried to rethink what kind of space that could be if it was a space that felt far more human and far more people orientated. And I would say that's the common theme, that's probably the golden thread that runs through all of this, is how do we create these spaces that put people at the centre and people in all their diversity at the centre, and design back in the things that help all of us to feel healthy and well. In my day job as introduced, I'm a student director at Greater Sport, which is the active partnership for Greater Manchester. And my role is very much in leading and supporting and connecting GM Moving, which is our whole system movement for movement. So my job there is to enable everybody, people and partners across Greater Manchester, to work together to enable active lives for all. And what we know is that to enable active lives for all, we need to design it back in to our neighbourhoods, to active environments, so that it's something that everybody can do every day. And for me, again, thinking my lens, a key part of that has been how I get about. So from growing up on the streets of Manchester on my bike, getting to school on the back of a tandem, as a parent trying to create play streets, through to being part of Chorlton bike deliveries, lots of cycle hire schemes, and now in my work. For me, being able to get about in an active day, every day, has been key to how I relate to my local place, relate to my local neighbourhood, and how I think we can help design neighbourhoods that feel far more healthy and sustainable for everyone. So there's lots and lots of frameworks, and you probably know different models to help define what are these key ingredients for a healthy neighbourhood. This is just one. I could have shared a number of them, but the Healthy Streets framework by Lucy Saunders, I would recommend. And I guess for one particular reason is I think that in my experience talking to others when sharing this is these things that people can relate to. So often we found, haven't we, that whether we're talking about sort of the planning of places or we're talking about services within a neighbourhood, often these things have become quite dehumanised. And actually this takes us back to the things that we care about as people in everyday language, you know, the things that matter, that really help us to make sure that our streets and neighbourhoods do feel like places that we want to be, we want to linger, and that we can all get about. So that now underpins our strategy in Greater Manchester for what we call our Streets for All strategy, which is now being developed into a Streets for All design guide. And I use it both as a councillor when thinking about in my local place and local neighbourhood, about the language that I use and the key ingredients of what we want to create locally, as well as in our GM moving strategies around physical activity and healthy, active neighbourhoods. So, living in a healthy, active place and working in a healthy, active place matters to all of us. And what we know is we all have a role to play in enabling that to happen. So what I'm going to talk to really in this session now is to focus on the approach that we're taking, both from a GM moving perspective and as a councillor, in recognising all the different influences on whether or not the place that we live is healthy, it's active, it's a place that we can choose to walk or cycle or wheel and to play. And in doing that, in recognising that often some of these key things around our place can feel like it's a bit of a tug of war, can feel like lots of things are in competition with each other, whether it's healthy or whether it's somewhere that's economically thriving. Sometimes have been framed as if they're in opposition, whereas in fact, what we know and what we see is a lot of these things go hand in hand. That if you want a place to thrive, for your local businesses to thrive, actually that also needs to be a place that is an attractive, healthy place that people want to come and visit, that you've got increased footfall, you've got all those things that make it somewhere that people want to hang around, they want to linger, and it's got a diversity of offer. So a lot of my work is really helping to demonstrate that things that have often seemed as if they're pulling in different directions, that actually if we come together around a shared vision of what a healthy neighbourhood looks like, we recognise that we can all work together, pulling in the same direction to help achieve that, both for now and for the longer term. And one of the ways we do this, I don't know if this might be familiar to some of you, this is the socio-ecological model, which is at the heart of everything we do in terms of our GM moving strategy, and which I now find myself going back to and using for everything I'm doing in any of my hats, in recognising all those different layers, all those different points of influence on all the things that we do and we create, whether it's as an active neighbourhood, a healthy neighbourhood, whether we're thinking about physical activity, or to be honest, any other aspect of change that we're trying to make. You can't just go to one of these layers in the onion, as we call it. We have to recognise that we have to influence, create change across each of those layers if that's going to be transformational and to stick. So I'm just going to briefly just talk through some of the ways we're doing that. So if we start with kind of the individual, I talked about my own individual lens, and obviously all of this is through a lens of what I see in my experiences and all those unconscious bias. So we have to understand, don't we, for your local people, your local community, all the things about what matters to them, what brings them joy, and what helps them to live a healthy, active life, and what aids connection and participation. So whether that's thinking about within our local park, where we've got this, some brilliant schemes, and then across Greater Manchester in gathering the data and the insight, and really doing much better to listen to people, listen to communities, involve them, recognise that we can't make assumptions about what a healthy neighbourhood looks like to some local people if we want to design cities and places and spaces that work for everyone. And then thinking about all those parts of the social environment, I wouldn't now ride my bike if it wasn't for the fact that was a cultural norm in my family, in my peer group, in my community, with my colleagues, and all those ways that we influence each other, and how we really grow on that as a strength, develop that as a strength, those points of connection. So a lot of our work, again, in Greater Manchester has been thinking, for example, around GM walking, has been really growing this network and this movement of people who are going out walking in their local area, building on all the things we saw during COVID, where lots of people far more spontaneously took to, you know, grouping up and going together for a walk as something they were allowed to do. So we've got lots now of community groups that are getting up and getting out and just going for a walk around their local place. And in that process, they start to recognise the strengths within their local place, the green spaces they maybe hadn't discovered before, the places and spaces that actually bring them health and well-being that maybe previously they'd overlooked. And by going out together, they find new routes, and they also have a sense of connection and safety and a lot of those things that we talked about at the beginning that make for us a healthy neighbourhood. And this has really been growing as a movement across Greater Manchester. You can look at the DM Walks website. There's lots of brilliant stories and brilliant maps that communities have started to develop to help grow this. We've also, you can see there's the hashtag Active Souls movement. So that has been thinking around how we invite people to just day to day think about what footwear they wear that enables them to be active. So in any of your workplaces, you know, if you're based in the town hall, if you're based an officer somewhere else, you know, do you create both permission and invitation for people to wear active soles that actually encourage them to get to and from work and home in an active way, and to dismiss the idea that maybe particularly women often feel that they might need to wear heels, or men might need to wear smart shoes to be taken seriously. So from Andy Burnham down, there's been a real push to go, put your active soles on and be proud of that, and taking photographs in meetings to say, look, you know, this is about how we encourage again a culture and support each other and our peer groups as networks to do that. Then thinking about the organisations and institutions that exist within our neighbourhoods and our places, and those as partners and how they all play a part, and how we help them to work together to be more than the sum of their parts. So from our schools to our GPs to our traders, all of those we know are critical to whether we have a healthy neighbourhood or not. And it's been brilliant seeing how they all recognise the role that they can play, which helps obviously them as people that make work in the neighbourhood, but also to be more connected within their community. So as an example, a much wider kind of spatial footprint across Greater Manchester has been trying to bring partners together at scale, both in terms of very small kind of community groups, informal networks, to our big partners like Transport of Greater Manchester or Greater Manchester ICS and our councillors and our local authorities, all coming together to recognise their role in a shared mission to make Greater Manchester a great place to walk, cycle, wheel and live. And within that, lots of those conversations have been thinking about what that means for us at a neighbourhood level and how we spread and grow good practice. So just that convening piece and bringing people together and recognising the shared mission that they all play a role in. And then the physical environment. So often people go straight to thinking about the physical space. Certainly when you talk about active travel, for example, they think about the infrastructure. Obviously what we know is it's much more than that. Going back to that first picture and a lot of things you described, it's often how that feels, how that physical environment is, whether there's benches to sit down on, whether it's inclusive space, whether those pavements are easy for everybody, whatever your mobility needs, and whether it feels like somewhere that feels safe, that you belong, that you're welcome, and that you're invited to be active and to stay. So you've probably all have so many different policies and strategies, whether that's at a hyper-local level or across, again, a bigger footprint. In Greater Manchester, you can see there we've got the Healthy Streets framework at the top, but then sitting around that thinking about, you know, features of a 20-minute neighbourhood, and part of designing a fantastic tool which helps, so a toolkit with the Town and Country Planning Association on 20-minute neighbourhood, which got some good examples of how we can embed that within our practice. Thinking about there, you can see to the left corner a map. So on the Active Travel website now, you can look at your own local area and get a sense of all the features within a 15-20 minute distance. And again, to encourage people to recognise what they can access on their doorstep and how we embed that in all policy and practice as a whole system. And at a local level, people are doing more, aren't they, to recognise how they can share those assets locally. So here we are in Chorlton, brilliant local community group, realised during COVID period how much people were enjoying the green space, but how lots of people didn't know what was on their doorstep. And just by creating this map, that then went through everybody's letterboxes and then it into tea towels. And we've seen these things happen, haven't we? Like lots of flowers across the whole of the UK as people have taken ownership of their local place and helped to really shine a light on the things that are good and the things that make a place feel good for all of us. And then, sorry, we've got policy. So all those things that we're hardwiring in to try and make sure that, again, across all our policy and strategy, whether that's at a very local level in terms of our ward plans, or whether that's a Greater Manchester level, that we're designing these things into everything for a far more kind of integrated approach. And then trying to distill them so we don't have shelves and shelves of strategies and policies that sit and aren't looked at, recognising that we've got these shared outcomes that we can all work towards. And part of this has been really trying to help everybody in the system to be advocates for each other's agendas. So in my hat as a director at Greater Sport, I'm no longer going into rooms always focusing on our agenda of physical activity. It's recognising the role that has to play in a more sustainable, fairer, more equitable Greater Manchester, and being an ambassador for other people's agendas in the other spaces that I'm in. So recognising that collectively, these are all key benefits that come from moving that benefit other agendas, and likewise other people's agendas will help unlock the capacity and create the conditions for people to live a more active life. And holding those agendas collectively has been really powerful. And then this, how often do we ask the question? We often talk about the benefits, but how often do we genuinely talk about the cost of doing nothing? So I took this was Chris Boardman's Made to Move document from a few years ago, and it's not necessary to focus on here the cost of doing nothing from Active Travel. It's more as a reminder to constantly ask that question of what if we do nothing? And I think it's particularly critical when thinking about healthy neighbourhoods, because we know there's so many things that are happening that if they continue, whether that's car domination, some of the other challenges around our space and how our space is allocated and used, if we do nothing, we know that unfortunately with the continued climate breakdown, that we're not going to have places that are healthy or sustainable or safe for any of us to live. So let's keep asking the question. So all of those things build up to have our whole system map, as you can see, which we then use across the piece, which finally, that last piece really in terms of culture is watching your language. So I don't know how many of you, when you think about healthy neighbourhoods, you know, people often then go to what we talked about, low traffic neighbourhoods, and to other kind of very car-centric language, which again removes people, it removes the focus of what we're trying to achieve. It starts focusing on some of the things that maybe we're seen to be taking away. That we're reducing perhaps the number of cars that are in the streets, as opposed to focusing on actually what we're trying to create, which are places that are more connected, more healthy, more sustainable, more joyous for everybody. And people, we all get so caught up, don't we, in sometimes this language that takes over. So how car-centric, as one example, our language becomes. So from creating cycleways that are called superhighways, is that necessary? Even our walking, you know, just going to walk together becomes a walking bus. There's so many examples of how we end up getting caught up in language that is unhelpful to us. So I encourage you to keep checking your language and does it actually advocate for healthy neighbourhoods or not? And with it, the visuals. Just quickly, this is in thinking about approach and how we make transformational change happen. What we've done in Greater Manchester is effectively codify the learning across all these place-based projects that have been going on into these 5 key enablers. And we found that these are key to unlocking longer term change. And these can apply really to any aspect of any kind of wicked problem that we're addressing. So whilst these here have been particularly kind of captured in our work around enabling active lives for all, they're now filtering in to other aspects of our work around public service reform, for example, in Greater Manchester, in terms of how we create the conditions as a whole system to move in the direction that we want to. And this means all of us playing roles. And again, this is another way of just kind of codifying, capturing the many different ways and different roles that people play in the system to advocate on these agendas, and to know that we can all play any one of these or multiple roles at any one time. And I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to skip to that and say have courage. Sometimes when we talk about healthy neighbourhoods, there's so many different interdependencies, and I would just encourage you just to start somewhere and see where that goes, and put on your active souls, and often start with a walk is a good place to go and connect with your local place.